Hey, I'm Greg Atkinson. I'm here with an old friend, Dave Gibbons from the West Coast. And I am so excited about this interview. We have been excited about having Dave speak at the First Impressions Conference for a long while. I read a book of his years ago that I'm going to talk about in a little bit and how it influenced me. And we'll kind of guide some of the questions that we talk about today. But first of all, Dave, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. It's great seeing you again, man. It's great to see how, God's been working in your life.
I am humbled and honored and excited to be a part of this conference, this First Impressions Conference, and to get to interview and speak with people that I respect and admire, like yourself, and follow and watch as influencers and thought leaders in the world. And so I wanted to ask you, as an influencer, pastor, and leader, and you're one of the most brilliant and creative and innovative people I know, and you have your hands on a lot of stuff, which I think is awesome, and both in church and culture and business and the arts, and are doing some incredible stuff. When it comes to creativity and innovation, there's no secret. This has been a wild year. And when people see this, it's November. It's been one heck of a 2020. What do you think of church in 2020, and where you see us now and where you see us going? What do you think will change and not necessarily be the same coming out of this COVID reality?
Wow, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I think right now we are experiencing probably one of the greatest transitions in my lifetime. And my guess is it could be for several hundreds of years that we haven't seen this type of shift. What we're seeing is a deconstruction of all the major institutions that we've held sacred, or that we're used to. It could be government, it could be health, education, and then we have religion or church. All these things are being re-examined and being questioned, and there's a growing cynicism, if not an antagonism now, towards the institution. So it's a shift, where it used to be a trusted thing, now it's not at all. And so there's a bias against an institution. So I think that's a huge cultural movement. You also have, I think, that the church is contending with, and I'll get to where the church is and where it's going, but it's important to understand the cultural milieu. You also have the economic shift of people losing their jobs. And so we're facing one of the greatest unemployment moments because of the pandemic, but I don't see it necessarily getting better. I was just at a manufacturing plant and also a technology center in Michigan. And they're based in Japan, but they have a headquarters in Michigan. And they're one of the producers of the major producers of robotics and AI. And basically they said, the revolution's already here and it's gonna keep growing. They said it used to be, we try to get robots to be as good as humans. And he said, Dave, this is the CEO, he said, they're better than humans now. And then he took me to a robot that had 3 colored jars of these balls, like they're red, yellow, like blue. And the robot dumped them all out. And then he said, watch this. And the robot then selected the different colors and placed it in the right jar, all within like a few seconds. You couldn't beat the robot doing this. And so he says, Dave, they're going to be able to drive cars, like already, they're going to drive the trucks. They can maneuver in the urban centers. He said, it's going to be crazy in terms of the revolution of robots. They're taking over sales jobs, driving jobs. They can even take over accounting jobs, surgical jobs, even high skilled areas. So he says, we're going to see 30 to 50% unemployment within 10 years.
Wow.
And so this is a huge, huge shift. And it's going to force the church to deal with things, not only from a cultural, societal, but then from an economic perspective, because we're used to a lot of donations, a lot of people trusting us with the stewardship of their resources, but now you have a growing distrust with the next generation. So anyways, all that to say that there's a lot of things that the church has to contend with, and it's not going to be easy, but I do believe this could be one of the best moments for the church, because we know this moment as essential living, and we're brought back to the focus on relationships. And it's not so much the building of buildings, because we may lose our buildings. People who went into campaigns and now are greatly indebted, it's going to be a struggle. But the focus now is building people.
Mm-hmm.
Building buildings is not bad. I believe mega churches are great. They're great resource centers. They're wonderful for communities many times. But the growing movement is really a movement, not so much that's centralized, but it's decentralized. And it's not so much even this like church planting as we know it, but it's people planting. It's seeing not about, I got to construct this 3-year strategy, raise $100,000, $300,000 to plant churches. But what if I took that investment and started investing in young artists and entrepreneurs? The same type of mission budget where we allocated money to missionaries and church planners. Why don't we do that with leaders in the marketplace? Why don't we have a venture capital fund or an angel fund to invest in our own congregational members, to seed them for the future? I'll tell you what, the business people in our churches, they would get so pumped up about that. I already know that, because we're already launching funds to do this. And I know they said, man, why don't our pastors do this? Why don't they invest in our own young people in leadership and create boot camps for them? And then we can mentor them. I said, right on. And so to me, if the church can see this as an opportunity, there's this really cool picture to me of these. There's this called lodge pine seeds. And they're these pine trees that have these cones that have these resin protection on it. And what happens when a fire comes, it hits that seed and it melts all the resin, and then the seed germinates and then it grows, but it only is activated by the fire. And I feel there's the seed of the church, the way God had intended it to be, to equip the people, to come alongside them, serve our people, not about coming to our thing, but we go to their thing, and then supporting them. I feel that seed is being activated again, because we're thinking about people, we're thinking about the essentials of life, which are our relationships. So I'm excited for the church. When I work with business leaders, they often will, depending upon who it is, there's a struggle with this moment, because if you're in fear, you're paralyzed. You're in panic. But I talked to a leader who was an executive with Tesla, one of the C-suite, and he said, this is the moment that the great companies, they see this as their advantage. This moment becomes their opportunity to accelerate. And so I feel the same way with us, because, even though it's really hard and maybe we're not used to these times, and the focus is reshifting from programs on Sunday to every day and to our people's dreams versus our dream for the city, I feel we have all the essential tools we need and resources to see a great transformation of our society, and we can be a part of it. We don't have to be on the sidelines.
I agree. Do you you touched on a couple things that I want to go back and unpack just a little bit. When you were talking about AI and the intelligence and the robots and things that are happening right now in present day and will only increase over the years. I know when I was shopping recently at a CVS pharmacy, and they had a self-checkout option, and I bypassed the cashier and went, because I figured I could check myself out quicker and faster. And there was one person at the cashier, and then there was 2 empty self-checkouts. So I just went and did it myself. But as in this kind of world where you have interactions with self-checkout machines and, like you said, robots and AI, do you think there's a chance on the other side, when people come to a church, a local church setting, and this is the First Impressions Conference, so a lot of times we talk about parking teams and greeters and ushers, and you just touched on briefly, you mentioned the word relationships, and that's about relationships. do we have an advantage as a local church for people to actually interact with people? Now, we may be wearing masks, we may not be touching or hugging right now or shaking hands, but do we have an advantage when it comes to people and relationships when we meet and gather together as the gathered church over a world that is filling up with more and more machines? Do you see there being a way that we could capitalize on what's happening as the local church?
Yes, there is, but it requires a mindset shift and a culture shift and a metric shift. And it depends on who you are. If you're a boomer, you know, you're used to people coming to church, and that's where we make the impact. So we create a program, a situation to make everybody comfortable, things that they get excited about. So boomers may be attracted to something like that, and also people who are church people. But the next generation and unchurched people, I don't think they're necessarily attracted to it. And the pandemic probably has allowed people to experience a lot of things online that they didn't know they could really check out too, whether it's church or spirituality, meaning, significance. So they don't have to go to an unsafe place where they don't know people to check out the church or check out what they're talking about. They can go online. And so I think depending upon who it is, they're going to come to church or they're going to stay away. And I think if you're looking at the next generation, I believe that we have to reorient ourselves to not thinking about trying to get people to us, but we go to them, but not in a model of like trying to sell something, you know, where we're trying to manipulate and bait and switch them. You know, I'm going to be nice to them so that they'll come to my church. It's like, no, you're going to be nice to them because that's what we're supposed to do. And, you know, that's what humans do. You know, they're loving. And then if we're followers of Christ, even more so, we have supernatural energy to accomplish that. And so to me, it's like we have to reorient ourselves to thinking, how do I equip and empower our people to be loved wherever they are? And so people say, oh, it's not about a Bible study at work or maybe a prayer group. Well, you can do that if you want. But most of the people who don't know Jesus, they're not going to do that. So how are you going to integrate your faith then? Well, it's through loving relationships. Like, what do you do with your buddies? You know, you say, hey, let's go out to eat, man. And then, you know, you watch football, you talk. How you doing, man? You doing all right? You don't normally with your buddies say, hey, let's pull out our Bibles right now and let's have a little devotional. You know, friends that you haven't seen in a while, you don't do that. So I said, man, normal people, that's how you talk. So I said, equip people to love people that way. And you're not compromising the gospel, you're being the gospel. Because the big shift is from declaration to demonstration. Because I think because of the culture that we've lived in over the last few decades, it's been a proclamation focus where we preach at people and the center of the church and the pinnacle of it is the pulpit. I think it's really reversed now, where you're seeing it through influencers, through YouTube, people you don't even know. They can gain an audience of millions. Yep. And so they have a bigger audience than our megachurch pastors, you know. And so to me, it's like it do us well to empower these influencers, these leaders, equip the ones that got God's hands on in the marketplace. Because if you really care about numbers, if numbers is the big thing that you want to see, like revival, like all over the world, well, the model is not having people come to your Babel or to your silo. It's really about releasing people where they are, you going to them, equipping them. So that's what I do. I try to come alongside the leaders in the marketplace and I advise them. We would call that as pastors discipleship. But I'm consulting, I'm advising them on culture, their leadership, on strategic decisions, all with non-religious language, but fully empowered by the Spirit. But I don't highlight that. I don't say that. But they know it. They know something's different, and then people will ask you about that.
Yeah, I love it. You mentioned something I wanted to touch on both times that you've shared. You've talked a little bit just in passing about building, and you talked about us going to them, not expecting them to come to us, and coming out. And I've been to your building. I did a speaking event over a decade ago at your church. You have a beautiful facility. But through this pandemic, what lessons should we have been learning about, you know, I heard Larry Osborne say that he thinks we've been too building centric that it's all about the building and come to the building. And man, if we could just get back in the building, and we miss the building,
Yeah.
and why can't we gather together in person? What lessons should we be learning in this pandemic? As people are watching this, there's still probably people that are not meeting until 2021. I even heard somebody the other day say 2022, or when there's a vaccine. But there's a lot of churches that have already declared and decided we're not gathering in person again until 2021. And so what lessons should we be learning as church leaders?
There's so many lessons. One is, I think it's go back again to the origins, our essential mandate. And our essential mandate was to love God, love our neighbor. And to me, if you look at any one thing that we focus on, is love. So one needs to ask, how can I best love my community? And so what that means is you got to go listen first. You know, you have, instead of imposing your strategy of how to get people to a building, it's more like, okay, they're the buildings of God. They're the temples of God. Even people who aren't Christians, you know, they're made in his image. I need to go and spend and rub shoulders with them to see what God's doing in them, and ask them, hey, what do you need? How can we support you? But just walk the streets like Nehemiah and let your heart be broke with the things that break God's heart. And then suddenly, man, your creativity will just start to spark. And it's exciting to me, because once you get into the streets and you start to listen to people, relate to people, I mean, everything gets reoriented in terms of your strategy. And I think a key factor of this is a key principle during this pandemic is important, is to think about the one, because it's hard. You're not talking necessarily masses like this, like we're talking. You can talk in a Zoom call and you'll see maybe 100 or a few hundred max, or 1,000. But the truth is, you can only sometimes like focus on one at a time. And I think there's something powerful about that. Is our models of metrics in the past were Sunday morning attendance. And then also, if you look at the secondary one, it was adoption of small groups. Like, what was the assimilation of our congregation into small groups? So people say 80% was awesome, 90%, well, we have like 95. People got really excited about that. But I said, no, but think about it. How many small group systems do you know are really effective over the long haul? Because you get a lot of people in there that are toxic, and then they're actually not ready to be in a small group, and they ruin the group that really wants to be committed. And so maybe we can have groups for them, but the intense focus of our resources should be on the core, which typically is about 10%. And so I think one thing during the pandemic is you're focused on your family. And then the truth is, it's hard to talk to thousands and disciple thousands like we like to. Maybe you can do some teaching and stuff, but the deep life to life is going to be like this type of thing. And I believe that we can, even through a Zoom call, have equal, if not more, impact. And people go, really? Because you always hear people say, hey, it's about in person, man. I can't wait to get back. Yeah, that's true. But man, there's COVID and people are dying because of this. But they go, but there's something unique. I go, okay, for some of us. But the truth is, I said, think about your relationship with the Spirit of God. I go, when's the last time you physically touched him? I go, you may feel him, but do you see him like we see even people on screen? And so I said, my guess is that you can have an intimacy, even though you don't always feel physically present, or you see somebody like the way you used to see them. And I said that what this exercise is, I feel, is a muscle in us that's transcendent, because we're not just physical beings. There's the immaterial side of us, and there's a side of us that's spirit. And I feel we can tap into that, trusting that the Spirit can connect us even on screen, that you could feel like this energy from the Spirit. Like, hold my hands like this, say, hey, feel this for a second. See if you sense or sense any energy from the Holy Spirit. Like, Spirit of God, touch Greg right now. Like, and take any name you want, but Spirit of God, just touch the persons that are listening to this right now, from their head to their toe. Just refresh them. Give them joy. May they feel your love. And what happens is, you can see it. I've been doing like these consulting things online, and I was kind of, skeptical about. I go, I don't know if they can be as good as when I'm in person with them. And so we did it. And I tell you what, the people, Christian and non-Christians, they said, wow, they said that was way better than I expected it to be, because people were starting to cry. They're starting to feel the feels. And I said, you know, one thing we can learn during the pandemic is that we have other ways to communicate that maybe be more efficient and even more effective. Because I know one thing too, in terms of efficiency, I don't have to get dressed and drive in a car an hour. And my meetings have been reduced in terms of my time allocations. I'm a lot more effective. And then I'm targeting key people versus just trying to think like a mass, you know, shotgun approach of communication.
Yeah, you nailed it when you talk about when we utilize tools that God has given us, like technology, that we're more efficient and more effective. You were talking about the great commandment and loving your neighbor. And I mentioned earlier that I was deeply impacted by one of your books years ago, The Monkey and the Fish. And what I still remember years later is the way you described loving your neighbor. And I still think about it, and I've shared it with numerous people over the years, that loving our neighbor means, and I got this from you and your writing, people that are not like us, people
Yeah.
that think differently than us, and dare I say, people that are our enemy. And so from your writing of The Monkey and the Fish, which you have lived out, and it was birthed in you, and you wrote that, when we are in this pandemic and we're in a world, now we're on different parts of the country. You're on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast, I'm in the South. People here are a little bit more interesting, I would say. I find a lot more people fighting about whether or not they should wear a mask, and I'm trying to tell people, you know, hey, this is a way we can show that we love our neighbor, and we have compassion, and we care for others. But I'm sure it happens all over, not just in the South and on the East Coast. But when you think about your passion for loving your neighbor, and you're writing about that over the years, how can we do that in a global pandemic when it comes to something as simple as wearing a mask, or other tangible ways? How can we best love our neighbors in 2020, in a time that we have, you know, the word has just been thrown around so much, unprecedented time that we are living in? How can we love our neighbor?
Well, I think a couple of things that we have a more difficult time in the West is because we say love is like mostly defined in terms of words. This is say, I love you. Again, it's not a demonstration of, so we don't see it as a verb as much as like a word. I love you, brother. But do you really love them? Like you're willing to give your life for them, serve them? You know, I don't know if we love them that much. And then, you know, I feel this, our love too is not corporate, it's more individualized. So Westerners tend to think about, you know, self-preservation. They're not thinking about the other. Whereas, you know, from our Asian communities, we're much more corporate in our thinking. So if I do something wrong, I've shamed the whole nation. Like that's what we're feeling, that type of weight. So that's why you see in Asia, the effectiveness, you know, of them being able to battle the pandemic is much, it's like amazing to me. If you look at Taiwan and Korea and some of these other cities, it's crazy good because they're really tracing things. People care for each other. So it's just a different way of thinking. You know, it's not that necessarily that independence is bad, but if it does affect somebody else in a negative way, you know, we need to look at that, right? So I think one thing is just we have difficulty because of just our cultural perspective, our cultural lens. I think the other aspects that are difficult to approach, you know, in loving our neighbor really has to deal with really believing if what God said in Luke 10 is true. You know, do you really believe that the neighbor is someone different than you? You know, because we were trained in church, you know, just go witness and go bring people to church, unchurch Harry Mary, you know, Saddleback Sam. And these are all like really great things. You know, they helped us to let the care for people. But what it was built upon was a homogeneous principle, you know, where we were trying to grow our churches quickly. And so they say, target people like you. So it's very much like a business approach. Again, it's not necessarily all bad, but if you're looking at the biblical translation of neighbor, Jesus translated it, or he gave a response to the question in a very Bruce Lee way, right? And he's the great theologian, Bruce Lee. The guy asked Jesus, well, who's my neighbor? He goes, let me tell you a story. And then he told him that Good Samaritan story. And you guys know the story, but it's like you said, Greg, it's the opposite. It's someone that you would hate, someone that is culturally different than you, someone that maybe you would feel even would betray you, or is unforgivable, socially, economic different. Who's the one that makes you uncomfortable? That you see the person and you want to go the opposite direction. You see them and you want to unfriend them. And you go, I can't believe they think that. Who's that person? And so to me, that's our neighbor. So I think it first has to fundamentally shift that. Do you really believe that that's God saying it? Because if you don't fundamentally believe that's God saying it, then yeah, you're going to just do what you think is right. But for those who really believe in Jesus and then believe in the Bible, you go, okay, I got to deal with that, because he said all the law could be summed up in this one thing, love me and love my neighbor. Because you really can't love God well unless you learn how to love your neighbor, the other, because God is the most alien of us all. That's why he says, if you can love the least of these, you've done it unto me. And then if you can love your brother who you don't, that you see, then you can love a God whom you don't see. But if you can't love this brother, then that you see, then how do you love God? Really, he's really trying to highlight that contrast. And so, yes, I feel that the way we got to do this is probably ask a couple questions practically. I always say questions will lead you to solutions. Don't impose your answer on the situation. So you got to ask the right questions. So if you think like Jesus and he's thinking about neighbor, and then someone being not like you, you ask this in your city. Who is most unlike me in my city? Who do I have problems with? Who do I not want to hang out with? Who's the misfit? Who's the outsider? Who's the one that riles me up? You see, this is the outsider, because again, it's no big deal if we can love someone like us. It's a big deal when you can love someone not like you. And that's why people like Mother Teresa and Martin Luther King Jr., they got like Nobel Peace Prizes. The world recognized their ability to love in the deepest way, in an unselfish way. They gave their lives for it. And so the world even recognizes that type of agape love. And so to me, this is the love that we're striving for. And these are the questions we ask that will lead us to the darkest places of our city. So that's why, we made a transition from where you were in our building in Irvine to Santa Ana, because I had to wrestle with this when I came back from Bangkok. And I said, I was asking, I go, okay, I need to relook at this, because my heart changed in Bangkok when I was with the people in the streets. And I said, in my county, who are the misfits? Who's the outsiders? And it was 5 minutes away. It was Santa Ana. Most undocumented people were in Santa Ana, the youngest city in America, the most densely populated, one of the most densely populated. And I said, the gangs are here, the homeless are here, in this beautiful Orange County, right in the middle of it all, like the capital of Orange County. It's right here, it's Santa Ana. And people like our evangelical community, man, they thought we were crazy when we even thought about that. Because, we're growing like crazy, we're doing well. Why would you move? And what drove me was like Luke 10. It's like, who's the outsider? There's enough churches here in Irvine. They're doing great. And I love these people. But I said, but who's going to Santa Ana?
That's beautiful. I think about that a lot, and I heard a great message about it recently. I can't remember who it was. I don't want to say because I don't want to mess it up, but somebody really unpacked the Good Samaritan parable very well. And I was thinking, why don't we read that again, and why don't we read it slower, and why don't we take off the American lens and really, really grasp this concept of the Good Samaritan and what Jesus was trying to communicate about our neighbor. And so something that, has come up big time in 2020 and is highly controversial. I've taken heat about it. You've taken heat about it. And that's the Black Lives Matter movement. And so when I think about loving our neighbor demonstrating, you talked about demonstrating love, love being a verb, loving people that are not like us, and expressing humanity and love and compassion and care, which is what, the root of the First Impressions Conference is hospitality. Last year's theme was the hospitality culture. And in my latest book, The Hospitality Handbook for Volunteers, I broke down the history of hospitality and how it's a biblical mandate, and that we're called to care and to love others, and we're called to show hospitality to strangers, to welcome the stranger, the Bible
Yes.
says in the Old Testament, New Testament. And so the last time I checked, neither one of us are Black, but why is it that we empathize with that movement? Why is it that we resonate with that movement? Why is it that we support that movement? What is it as a pastor and leader and influencer with thousands and thousands of people watching your lead and your works and your ministry? Why have you stuck your neck out and shown support for this movement?
Oh man, there's a couple reasons probably. Well, one is like probably you alluded to, you can feel the pain. It's just like, I don't even have to think about it. As soon as like you saw, George Floyd, being crushed and suffocated, it's like we all felt that way somehow. Maybe not that exact way, but we felt suffocated. We felt bullied, oppressed. And I felt probably you've experienced that too, Greg, when you're younger, somehow being bullied. And even now you can get that. And with some of our religious friends being the worst. And so I think we all can feel that if we think about it a bit, where we were the outcast, we were the ones that was the outsider and looked down upon and shamed. The other piece of this, to me, the reason why I can feel it is because of my friends. I have so many really good Black brothers and sisters, that are part of my teams, that I serve with, that I honor and totally respect. A lot of the entrepreneurial initiatives that the church is now thinking about in the evangelical spectrum, the Black church was doing decades ago. They were thinking entrepreneurially because their pastors were already bivocational. And so I really respected the Black church and how they did ministry even. But yeah, so they were my friends. And then in LA, where I am, one of my team members, his name's Q, Jean-Marie. And Q, my Black friend, like he's literally like my brother. He told me when I was in LA, we walked the streets praying for LA when we were launch the streets, launch some ministries and stuff in the streets. And he told me before he walked out, he goes, Dave, something happens, if stuff goes down, I got your back. And you want Q to have your back. This guy's like built, dude. Just like he's solid. And Q, though, he became a leader of BLM. He's one of the top leaders here in LA, one of the key executive leaders. And then I saw what he was doing on these protests, and I called him up and I said, bro, what can I do? I go, I don't know if I can do much, but what can we do? And so we did a rally. Thousands of people came from different churches and from different faith organizations. We all came together, and we held like this funeral for George Floyd and some of the other leaders, a memorial service that week that George Floyd had his funeral. But anyways, I think it's because of the empathy and because of that we experienced it, and then also relationship. When you have relationship with people that are literally your brothers and sisters, and you see the pain they've gone through, I think it really causes you to do something. You can't just sit there. If your brother or sister is getting beat up or there's injustice, you can't sit there. And so to me, it's not even like I have to think about it. It's just I'm in. It's just like it's an impulse. And so you don't think about it till like after, but because there's ramifications around it, because with Black Lives Matter, they'll say, well, we believe in the idea, but we don't believe in the organization. And I said, well, okay, that's a good way to parse it out if it helps. But I said, the truth is too, we still need to love the people in the organization and stand alongside of them. Because if you're looking at Good Samaritans, they're probably the Good Samaritans of our day. The BLM people, they're the ones that are the outcasts of a lot of our Christian community. And and they're looking at the church and they're seeing the hatred, and we saying we love them, but we won't stand with them in justice. He doesn't say, I don't know if they're asking us to believe what they believe. They didn't ask me that, but I stood up for injustice with them. And so, I want them to know I love them. I don't have to tell them that we believe differently. They already know what I do. They're smart enough. They're these are professors. They have, a lot of these leaders have doctorate degrees. They're really brilliant. And so to me, it's like, no, they know where you stand, but they love that you care. And so, that's why I do it out of relationship. I think, the other thing too, I feel it's an opportunity. Like I always look for windows of opportunities to demonstrate supernatural love, not in a goofy way, not in a way that's like I'm trying to impose something, but what's a natural way I can show love in a cultural moment, and I'm not having to be profiled, like being in public, because all this stuff can be done behind the scenes. How can I show support? And I said, man, this is a really wonderful moment for the church to show love to a community that thought the church doesn't care.
I agree. I think it is a huge moment for the Big C Church. I saw this meme the other day about if you ever wonder what you would be saying or doing during the 1960s civil rights movement, you're doing it right now. Like how you speak out, what you're saying, what you're doing, you're showing people what you would have done in the 60s. And so I think it goes back to empathy. And I want to connect some dots as we close here in just a little bit. But first, I want to ask you something about something personal. Now, again, I'm not African-American, and I'm also not Asian. I'm not Asian-American. And I started speaking out months ago when the term China virus was getting thrown around. And I said, that's going to sting. That's going to be offensive. That's going to upset some of my friends. I don't like that. And then it turned into words like Kung Flu and other things that I thought I just cringed, and it broke my heart. I wanted to ask you, as a friend of mine, what has it meant to you? What has it felt like to you? Help us understand. A lot of people, most of our audience that watch this are lead pastors, and we try to teach what it means to be hospitable and to show kindness. I'm very passionate about the power of kindness and loving our neighbors. But what does it mean for somebody? We just talked about Black Lives Matter if somebody's not Black. But for those that aren't Asian, why does that, I can't even put it into words for you. Why does it sting? Why does it hurt? What does it feel like to hear that?
I think it's sad, to be honest with, to me, I can't believe it's coming from a leader's mouth. It's like it's the stuff that you tell your kindergarten child, you don't talk that way, especially if you find out that it's sensitive to a person. So even though it may not be sensitive to you, if you go and travel at all, you just know there's different type of languages, right? And there's different meanings to words. So one who's not just domestic, but oriented globally, knows that these subcultures have many different languages, dialects, and then words mean different things in different cultures. So to me, it just saddened me. It saddened me, the insensitivity. For me personally, I think my generation probably has learned to suppress a lot of these things. You just get used to it. But what really I'm proud of this generation with is that they're not suppressing it. They're saying that's wrong. And they're standing up to the bullies. And to me, I said, man, I'm so proud of them. Literally, I was like, I'm so proud. My kids, my kids, the youth group or leaders in the community, I said, these are the prophets of our day. And I said, they're not going to put up with it anymore. They're loving too. They're standing up for the oppressed. That's why I say to people, like when you look at BLM, you look at these leaders, I go, at least they're doing something. They're doing something. They're willing to put their lives on the line. And there's always the radical crazies of any type of fringe movement or any group, but there's the core people of it. You see their heart. And so to me, it's like, I look at when leaders say this and I say, man, what it's stirring in us, I think is, man, we still got a long ways to go. And I think it's scary I think the lid has been taken off of the American church, and the young people look at it and say, you know what? I don't want to go there. If that's what they really believe, because they say this, they preach this, we're a place, we're home, and everybody's welcome here. Okay, really? And if that's the way you talk, do you really mean that? That America's for all, liberty for all? You know, and when you look at the Statue of Liberty thing about welcoming the strangers and welcoming those who are not part of our land, I said, do you really believe that? And so to me, it hurts. But I'm proud of this generation that's standing up and doing what's right.
I'm proud of this generation too. You know, it is, we always, in First Impressions world, and, you know, this is our 4th conference, but before this, there was never anything specifically just for First Impressions, which is why I started this conference. But we would always, when I taught or wrote about First Impressions for years, we'd always talk about everybody's welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome. And but it was just words. It was just words from church leaders and pastors of all are welcome here, no perfect people allowed, all those catchphrases. But when it comes down to where the rubber meets the road and we're living this stuff out with our Black brothers and sisters and our Asian brothers and sisters, and in this climate, this is where we see the gospel come to life of, do we really, really love our neighbor like the Good Samaritan? Do we really believe that all people are welcome here? All people are welcome in our congregation and at our church. And I'm so proud of the next generation. I have a 20-year-old daughter, an 18-year-old son, and a 16-year-old daughter. And last night I was scrolling through Instagram and I came across my 16-year-old daughter's Insta stories, her stories. And I clicked on it, and I don't know anything about this. I have not said anything to her, but she has all of these stories and memes and posts going on about injustice and about Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Black Lives Matters and all this stuff that my white 16-year-old daughter is posting on her Insta story. And, you know, our kids, they live in a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multiracial world.
Exactly.
My daughter, Grace, who's in college, who's 20, her friends are very multi-ethnic, and they see differently. And I have said for years, it's why every year, every time we've had a First Impressions conference, we've had speakers that addressed multi-ethnicity and race and diversity. Last year, we had Sam Collier, we had Daniel Yang, we had Dorwin Gray. Every year, we're touching on these themes because I have said for a long time, if I'm my daughter, Grace, who lives in a multi-ethnic world with friends and classmates, and her social circle are all multi-ethnic, and then she walks into the door of my church and it's mono-ethnic, we are irrelevant. We cease to be relevant. She walks in and it's like going back to the 1950s, and she's thinking, what world, what time warp have I just walked into? Where did everybody go? And so I'm proud of this next generation, and I'm excited to see where they take us when they are the leaders of the organizations and the businesses and culture and churches and the pastors and the missionaries. I'm excited to see men and women where they take us. But Dave, if you have any closing thoughts for us as we wrap up, things you want to leave us with. Again, the heart of all of this is that all people are welcome, and we love our neighbor, and we show and practice hospitality. That's the heart of the First Impressions Conference. But you're a pastor and you're a leader I greatly admire and respect. And so what closing thoughts do you want to leave us with?
You know, I think a lot of times when you go to conferences, you know, you get a lot of great ideas, you get chills, you go, wow, you're inspired. But, you know, just because we have chills doesn't mean we're transformed. You know, just because we got the idea down, you know, we have to put it to action. So maybe I could suggest a couple action points. You know, if we're really going to love our neighbor and be welcoming people, you know, practically in our homes, you know, you have to ask yourself, are you willing for your sons and daughters to marry brown or Black or Asian? That tells you bottom line whether you have a prejudice or a racist spirit. So I think it's really, that to me is a really good question to identify. When you go to the church corporate structure, maybe you could ask the questions, do we have a board representation of Black, brown, or Asian here? Not just in terms of melanin, the skin color, but in terms of culture, because you can have a different skin color, but be the same culture. So do you have a different cultures and genders represented there? Do you have women represented on the board? So it's a very important thing to look at women and color and culture as represented by the executive leadership of the church, the people who discern the power, the streaming of the power. Because it's not only welcoming a person to the table, is you're going to let them eat there, and then you're going to let them serve there, and you're going to let them own the home. So it's not just, again, letting them sit down at the table. So to me, that's a really important piece, that they can become the host. They can become the one who distributes and gives resources and be the ones who are given authority and power. That shows a major shift. Practically also, this means is that we have to give access to capital. It's like you have to be intentional, because we usually go to the same networks or to the same finder groups to find staff or key positions. And a lot of them work out of the networks that are all within the same streams that we're associated with. You have to go outside our streams to different other networks of brown, Black, and Asian to find these leaders. And then a lot of these leaders may not come from the seminaries these days. They may be coming from the marketplace. You may want the influencer to come in. You may want the artist or the business person to come in, and you incubate them. Just like you had interns create residencies to help people to launch into their new careers, not necessarily centered within the church, but they're being the church in the marketplace. And the last thing I would like to say, maybe just leave you with this one thing, that I met a gardener, a Japanese gardener, and he told me, when you get a watermelon, he says, your hope is that, it can grow. And so for us as typical novices, we look at a watermelon, we want as big a watermelon as possible. I think the biggest one was several hundred pounds, that's the world record. But they said, but if you wanted to have many seeds, he goes, you have to deprive it of water. You have to deprive it of fertilizer and care. So the watermelon thinks it's about to die. Because when it thinks it's about to die, that's when it produces the most seeds. So I like to tell the pastors, the leaders of churches and businesses and organizations, hey, don't fear this moment. And, we have to embrace, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of struggle, and we have to mourn what's lost, because there's a lot of loss. And so there's a grieving. But in the midst of the desert, one has to look with God's eyes, because God can take the desert and he can put those streams, those living streams of water, and he can cause an abundance to happen there. So in the barrenness, let God show you that there's seeds that he's planted there for you. And we're called to water it and activate it. And watch this become one of the best seasons for the church to thrive.
Amen. I believe we will thrive. I believe we will come out of this more in line with the heart of Christ. And so thank you, Dave, for sharing with us. Thank you for being our guest.
You're welcome.